You made a wudu by wiping over the socks. You took them off. The socks are not there anymore. But that doesn't take the tahara with it. The state of tahara doesn't go away with it. Because it was already established. Now you are in a state of tahara. Merely taking the khufs off doesn't invalidate your wudu until you make hadath. One last example, I guess, just to show, we're going to make it like we did last time. I think just to show or to give you a better understanding of what it means or how the counting should be, right? I want to give an example of, how the wiping over the socks, how long it gives you, how long of a time frame, right? So I'm going to give an example and use, when it starts and when it ends. Let's say, for example, somebody makes a wudu for Fajr prayer on Tuesday, right? Here. So somebody makes a wudu for Fajr on a Tuesday, right? He prays Fajr with it, right? And then he put the socks on, right? He maintains his wudu up until Dhuhr, right? For Dhuhr, he performs wudu not because he had to, but just because out of sunnah, following the sunnah, to renew your wudu for every prayer, even if you don't have to. So he performs wudu for Dhuhr. He maintains his tahara. He performs Asr with it. Renewed the wudu, but he prays Asr with it. And then he renews his wudu for Maghrib, again, not because he has to. He prays Maghrib with it. And then he prays Isha with it, right? And then finishes his prayer, sunnah and witr and everything, right? So he finishes his prayer for the night, right? And then he goes to relieve himself, and then he goes to sleep. He wakes up for Fajr on Wednesday, right? Time. Obviously, he couldn't maintain his wudu, could he? Right? He slept. So for Fajr, right, he performs wudu by wiping over the socks. Obviously, he kept the socks on while sleeping, right? So he performed wudu by wiping over the socks. Let's say, just for the sake of the discussion, at 5 a.m. on Wednesday, right? Then he prayed Fajr with it. And then, for Dhuhr and, Asr and Maghrib and Isha, right? He, performed wudu whether he needed to or not, right? Regardless, right? And he kept wiping. Now, when does the time for the wiping starts? Remember that the wudu, he started by making the first wudu on Tuesday morning for Fajr. But the first time he made wiping was on Wednesday morning, 5 a.m. When does the time start? Wednesday at 5 a.m. So Wednesday at 5 a.m., this is when the time frame for the wiping starts. Now, he's in town, he's not journeying. So he has what? 24 hours period of time. So he wiped all of Wednesday, right? And then he went to sleep. On Thursday morning, he woke up before 5 a.m., right? Performed wudu, wiped over the socks. At 5:30, they pray Fajr. He prayed with them. Now, remember, the time frame elapsed or expired at 5 a.m. on Thursday. Can he pray Fajr with that wudu, but wiping that he performed before 5 a.m. on Thursday? Yes. He performed wudu, wiped over the socks just before the time expired. Now, they pray Fajr at 5:30 after the time expired. He didn't commit any hadath. The time elapsed, but he's still in a state of tahara. So he performed Fajr with it. And it stayed with him, that state of tahara. He didn't nullify his state of tahara until Dhuhr. He prayed Dhuhr and then he went to the restroom. Let's say he relieved himself before Dhuhr. Can he wipe for Dhuhr? No. Why? Because the time frame for wiping expired at 5 a.m. on Thursday, that morning. So he cannot wipe over it anymore. But he didn't invalidate his wudu until dhuhr. So he prayed with it, fine. Had he invalidated his wudu, he needed to take them off and perform a wudu with washing his feet. Is that understood, ya akhwan? Clear for everybody? I want to give you another example. Let's say, for example, he woke up for Fajr on Thursday. I'm going to change it just a little bit. So he woke up for Fajr on Wednesday. Let's say, for example, he woke up at 4. Right? He performed wudu, wiped over the socks. Right? And just before 5, he took his shoes off. I'm sorry, not his shoes, his socks off, while in a state of tahara. Now, Fajr, they pray at 5:30. Can he pray Fajr? Yes. Because he is still in a state of tahara. He took his shoes off, and the time frame expired. He cannot wipe anymore, and he took his shoes off, his socks off. But that doesn't nullify his wudu. He's still in a state of tahara. He prayed Fajr, and then let's say, for example, he went to the restroom. Now he performed wudu again by washing his feet, put the socks on, and then he can wipe again. But the fact that he took his socks off doesn't invalidate his wudu. Is that clear, ya akhwan? That's very important. And you can see, for example, how the ease of the Sharia, ya akhwan. Look at the ease, subhanAllah. Look how easy it is. And so convenient. Allah Azza wa Jal doesn't want to make it hard and inconvenient on us. Look at the wide open mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal. He wants us to be tahir, but there is so easiness in it. So easy, subhanAllah. Time. Let's move to I want to move to wiping over the splint and the turban and the head cover for the woman. Okay. Splint is typically used at the time of injury. If somebody is injured, right? Or if somebody is ended up with a broken bone or broken leg or arm, right? They use splints to help it to recover and to help it to cure, right? That's what the splint is. And what is equivalent to it is the bandage, Band-Aid and, those adhesive bandages that they use for, smaller injuries and, cuts and whatnot. Right. Is it permissible to wipe over the splint? And we say yes. It is permissible to wipe over the splint if it is required, right? And we said that there are, and this is actually something that we talked about before while talking about al-wudu, and there are 4 cases. We said if the injury, right, is not covered and washing it does not harm it, nor does it extend the cure or shifa, it doesn't hurt it, then you have to wipe it. You have to wash it. Example, right? What is the example? Paper cut. We do this all the time, right? With a paper, sometimes you end up cutting. But it is such a minor injury. I mean, when does a paper cut get harmed by water? Right? Sometimes there is not even blood, right? It's a very minor injury. I don't think ever water will wipe it, right? Will harm it. Water doesn't harm it, or doesn't delay recovery. It's very minor. So in that case, you have to wash it. Let's say, for example, in the finger or in the toe, then you have to wash because it doesn't harm it. Second case, it is not covered, right? But washing harm it, but not wiping. In that case, you have to wipe it.
So let's say, for example, you have a not very minor, but somewhere in the middle injury in your, like for example, in your finger or in here, right? And this is an organ that you have to wash, right? It's not covered, it's not very major, it's not covered, but water will harm it, right? Not wiping though. So you wash the rest of the organ, but where the area where it is injured, then you just wipe over it. Third case, if it is not covered, but both wiping and washing harm it, then in that case you just do tayammum for that organ. The fourth case is where it is covered, right, and water will harm it, obviously, right, where you have bandage or whether you have splint, right, in that case you wipe over the bandage or the splint. Now, do you wipe part of it? Do you wipe over the whole splint? You have to wipe the whole splint, because like you would wash the whole organ. Let's say, for example, you have a broken arm, right? And the doctors say it's needed. They put a splint over the whole arm, right? If you didn't have a splint, you have to wash the whole arm. Remember, we said from the fingertip to the elbow. Likewise, if you have a splint over it, you have to wipe over the whole thing, everything. So you make your hand wet, and then you wipe over all of it. All of the splint need to be you wipe over. Now, wiping over the splint, right, is a little bit different than wiping over the socks and the khufs that we've been talking about. What are some of the differences, right? One of the differences is that you are allowed to wipe over the splint in both cases of minor impurity and major impurity. Contrast that to wiping over the khufs or the socks in only the case of minor impurity. Remember we said, if you have a major impurity, you cannot continue wiping over the socks. You have to take them off. Remember, that's one of the invalidators of wiping over the socks. So, a state of janaba, you have to take them off. But do you do the same if you have a splint? No. Even if you need to make ghusl, you wipe over it because water harm it. So that's the difference. Wiping over the socks only in case of minor impurity. Wiping over the splint in both cases of minor or major impurity. The second one is there is a time limit for wiping over the socks. 24 hours or 72 hours, depending on whether you're traveling or not. Is there a time limit for wiping over the splint? There's no time limit. As long as it is needed, you may wipe over the splint. It could be a month, it could be 2 months, it could be 6 months. Major injury, right? And you have to have the splint for this next 6 months. You can wipe over it for the next 6 months, as long as it is needed. But not the same for wiping over the socks. The third one, or difference, the wiping over the socks is restricted to the feet, right? The hoofs are worn where? On the feet, right? So the wiping is only on the feet. But for the splint, it could be on any organ. It could be the arm, could be the leg, right? Could be the neck, could be the head, right? And the injury can be anywhere. So you can wipe wherever it is. But not for the socks. The fourth one is, remember that one of the prerequisites for wiping over the socks or over the khufs is what? Pre-existing purity. So, can you just wear the socks and then start wiping over it? No, you have to perform wudu first by washing your feet, and then you put the socks on while in a state of purity, and then you can wipe over it going forward. Do you have to do the same thing for the splint? You have to perform wudu before you get injured. How do you know that you're going to get injured? Right? Who knows? If I knew that I'm going to get injured, I would probably avoid it. But nobody knows, right? So having a state of purity before putting the splint on It's not a requirement, right? So you can wipe over it even if you didn't have purity when they actually put it on for you or for the person who is injured. Time. It just came to mind a side note. When you put the splint on, or when they put it for you, do you have to have a niyyah? Do you need to intend that you're going to wipe over it? No. Type a similar example, similar question. Let me ask you this. Do you need to intend when you wear your khuf or your socks, do you need to intend that you're going to make wiping over them? No? Are you sure? But deeds are by the intention. No, you're right. I was just trying to make you doubt.
But the logic says
you don't need to. Here's why. Ask me why. The reason is because the hukum, which is the permissibility, the ruling, which is the permissibility of wiping over the socks, is attached to the fact that you already have them on, right? And it is inconvenient to take them off. You don't need to have to intention that when you're at the time you're wearing them, that okay, I'm gonna be wiping over them. You may not wipe over them. The hukum is attached to the fact that when you come to make wudu, right, and you're wearing the khuf or the socks, and it's inconvenient to take them off, you might just, well, alhamdulillah, I have a permissibility to wipe over it, right? You don't have to intend at the time of wearing them on, right? Similarly, when you, in the morning, when you put your garments on, when you put the dress on in the morning, do you intend that you're doing that for the sake of praying with them to cover your body? Nobody does that. It's not required. Similarly, when you put your khuf on or your socks on, you don't need to intend for that you're going to wipe over it. This is attached to the fact that you already have them on and you have the permissibility of wiping over them. That's with respect to the splint or the bandage. What with respect to the turban? Has anybody heard of the turban? Al-amama. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam used to wear a amama. Even these days, some people do it with a little of extension on the back. Typically white. You find this a lot in the... You find this a lot pretty common in the Gulf area. In different countries, they do it differently, right? Al-amama. If somebody has a amama on his head, is it permissible to wipe over it? Remember, we have to wipe the head, right? Part of the wudu. If I have al-amama, turban on, do I need to take it off and then wipe over the head, or can I wipe over al-amama? We say that it is permissible to wipe. It can be wiped over. Proof, because it has been narrated authentically that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam did that. He wiped over his turban. And this is from Hadith al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah in Sahih Muslim, where he said, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم مسح على عمامته وعلى الناصية والخفين. Al-Mughira narrated that the Prophet wiped over his khufs and over his forelock and over his turban. This is in Sahih Muslim. And if you actually think about it, right, if wiping over the socks is allowed, then this actually should go without saying. This is even closer to making sense. Why? Because the head is already an organ that you wipe over. You don't wash. Do you wash your head? You wipe over it. And the feet, you wash it. Yet it is permissible to wipe over it when you put your khufs on. So when you have an imama, it can be very easily understood that you can wipe over it, because it is an organ that you wipe over to begin with. So you see the logic. And the hadith, obviously, now this is the proof, hadith that the Prophet ﷺ wiped over the amama. طيب. How do you wipe over the amama, or over the turban? You have to wipe over all of it or most of it. All of it or most of it. And what is mustahab and what is sunnah, right, of the Prophet ﷺ, to wipe over any hair that may actually appear that the turban doesn't cover. So sometimes you put the imama, but there is the forelock. There's some, like for example, like this, right? Some hair may actually be can be seen from, and then from the sides there can be some hair from the side. Wiping over the forelock and wiping over the hair on the side, right, is actually sunnah. And then wiping over most or all of the turban. And obviously the ears like you do during the wudu, right? But unlike wiping over the khuf, right, it doesn't require that you have to have previous purity when you put the amama on. Remember, khuf you have to have purity, right? And then you put them on and then you can wipe over it. For the imama, you don't have to have previous purity. You can wipe over it even if you didn't have purity before. Nor, again, contrast to the wiping over the socks, nor is there a time limit. So you can continue wiping over the imama for as long as you want. Now I'm wearing a cap. Some people these days, they wear a hat. In the Gulf area, it is very common that they put what's called Akhuna Ammar. He's wearing what we call shimagh, this white sometimes and sometimes, reddish, right? Piece of garment that they put over the head and then it goes over the shoulder, right? On top of the cap, right? They call it shimagh. In some areas they call it al-ghutra or al-kufiyya, right? Different names. Now, hatta. Here's a Palestinian term for it. Can I wipe over that? Can I wipe over this hat? Or this cap, I'm sorry. Or if you were wearing, a hat, can you wipe over it? The answer is no. Why? Because this cannot be compared to al-imama. Why? What's the difference? The difference is a major difference. The difference is that al-imama, it is not easy to take it off and then put it on. It is easy to take it off, but it takes time to redo it. It doesn't hold in place, right? Some people, it may take them 5 minutes to 10 minutes to do it again. It's not easy. But how difficult is this to take this off? Well, very easy. So there's no reasoning to wipe over this. It doesn't compare. There's no analogy between this cap or the hat or the shmagh or whatever it is to the al-imama. Because there's inconvenience over there and hardship, right? So you can wipe over al-imama, but you cannot wipe over this. You have to take it off or the hat off and then wipe over your head. طيب. How much time are we left with? 15 minutes? 20 minutes? Okay, all right. I wanted to make a side note, but I don't think we have time. Khalas, inshallah, I'll remember to do it some other time. Although I think it's important, but fair, inshallah. The related topic is wiping over the head cover, al-khimar, for the woman. The women, obviously, in Islam, they have to cover their head, right? Including the hair. Type. Is it allowed, are they allowed, now this is for our sisters, are they allowed to wipe over al-khimar, the head cover? We say what they use to cover their head, right? Better not to wipe over it. It is better not to wipe over it. But if it is difficult to take it off and put it back on, then they may wipe over it. What is the reasoning? The reasoning to it is if Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam wiped over the turban, and that is the hukum for the man. right? These rulings are shared, are common for the man and for the woman. There is absolutely no difference between them. And if taking the turban is not easy, there's inconvenience in it, and it is hard to do that, and that is why it is permissible to wipe over it, while taking the khimar of the woman is even harder. Because the cover for the woman, right, it covers more than the imamah covers. And it is more difficult and more cumbersome to take that off and then put it on, right? So if the reasoning is that it is inconvenient, that is even truer for the women who are covering their head. And like I said, there is no difference between the man and the woman, right? If it is permissible for the man to wipe over the turban, it is permissible for the woman to wipe over their head cover, especially, remember what we said, it is better for it to take it off. But especially if, like I said, it is very difficult to do that, or let's say, for example, it is too cold, very cold, and they're afraid of getting harmed by it, or if they are, for example, in a public place. Some of the public areas, some of the public restrooms, yes. Some of the public restrooms are not hidden completely. You go to, for example, to the airport, right? Most airports, they have restrooms, but the restrooms, people can peek from the outside, and you may actually be able to see some who are in the restroom in front of the sinks, right? Because it's not fully covered, it's not fully hidden. So if she's afraid that some people may actually be able to see her hair, then definitely she can wipe over the head cover. So anything similar, any hardship or inconvenience, it's inconvenient to take it off, or the weather is severe or cold or whatever it is, right? Or if she's afraid of being seen, then she may wipe over the head cover. But she doesn't have to take it off. Time. Any questions? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
So when the woman has the hijab, she wears a hijab. Her ears will be covered, and everything else will be covered, so she can just do it over her ears.
Yes. Yep. So basically, like this, and then from above the cover.
One question: while doing masa on the socks, for example, go to a public restroom, you have shoes on. Normally for me, I remove my right shoe, then I do masa on my right shoe, I put the right shoe in, then I remove my left shoe, I do masa.
Okay, so the brother is asking, with respect to wiping over the socks, right? Let's say, for example, in a public restroom, right, and you're wearing your shoes, right? How do you make masah at the same time? Here's the trick. The trick, what you can do is you can actually loosen your shoes, right, and step on them, both of them at the same time, right? You take your feet out, right? You step on the shoes, and then you make masah at the same time. And then you put the shoes on.
So, what if you do right?
With water, right? Completely. All of it. Completely wash. That. While in the Sharia perspective, it means to wash or to use purifying water, right? To wash the whole body in a specific way as an act of ibadah. As an act of worship. Because al-ghusl, ya akhwan, is a ibadah, by the way. Like al-wudu. It is a ibadah. So that's why we say in the Sharia, al-ghusl is to use purifying water. Remember the purifying water that we discussed in the types of water? Yeah. Right. So reference that. It is to use purifying water to wash the whole body in a specific way. Right? According to the Sharia, as an act of worship to Allah Azza wa Jalla. What is the ruling? The ruling on al-ghusl is that it is mandatory when one of the cases that obligates al-ghusl exists or occurs. What is the dalil on this? قوله تعالى in Surah Al-Ma'idah وَإِن كُنْتُمْ جُنُبًا فَاطَّهَّرُوا. And if you are in a state of janaba, then purify yourselves. And that is an order that makes it what? Wajib. It makes it obligatory, or it makes it mandatory if one of the cases that obligates, and we're going to talk about that, what obligates al-ghusl. If one of those cases that obligates al-ghusl is there, then it is mandatory. It's not a choice. It is mandatory to perform al-ghusl. And all the ahadith, and we're going to see several of them, all the ahadith that were narrated to us from the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum on how to make al-ghusl, they all indicate that it is mandatory, that it is wajib. They're conveying that from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Which leads us to the next obvious topic. What obligates al-ghusl? What are the cases where al-ghusl is obligatory, is mandatory? We say the first one, there are multiple, there are actually five cases. The first one is when there is an emission of semen from its exit, whether in the male or the female, for the male or for the female. And there are two cases for this. First case while asleep or while awake. Is there a third case? There is no third case. It has to be one of two cases. Cannot be. You either are awake or you're asleep. Okay. If you are awake, right, and it is not just a small quantity, but it is ejaculation, right, with pleasure, then the ghusl becomes mandatory. Again, the proof on that is the ayah, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ جُنُبًا فَاطَّهَّرُوا. And if you are in a state of janaba, because ejaculation or emission of the semen in a shape or in a form of ejaculation with pleasure, that's the janaba. That's the definition of janaba. وَإِن كُنْتُمْ جُنُبًا فَاطَّهَّرُوا. And if you are in a state of janaba, then you need to make ghusl, which is the major purification, because the janaba is a major impurity. Also, for his saying, لِقَوْلِهِ عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ, and this is in Sunan Abi Dawood, and Imam al-Albani judged it as sahih, when he said to Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu, he said, إِذَا فَضَحْتَ الْمَاءَ فَاغْتَسِلْ. If you ejaculate semen, then perform ghusl. What if it is emitted in small quantities? There is no ejaculation, right? In small quantity and without pleasure. Yani sometimes it could be involuntary, right? You didn't mean to. Then it doesn't require ghusl. That could be the case if somebody is sick. Some sicknesses cause that. Some people, if they get too cold, they may emit. All of this is involuntary, right? There is no ejaculation, no pleasure. It doesn't require ghusl. How do you clean from that? Nothing. Do you need to clean from semen? No, it's tahir. Semen, al-mani, is tahir. No need to clean from it, as a matter of fact. So there's no ghusl and you don't need to clean. It's tahir in itself. Al-mani itself is a tahir, pure material. We are created from semen, right? Now, the other case, we said this is one while awake. While asleep, right? We say that while asleep, we call this what's called al-ihtilam in the Arabic language. Emitting semen is called al-ihtilam, which is wet dream, right? They translate it as wet dream. Then you must perform ghusl regardless. Why? Because while asleep you don't have feelings, right? You can't tell whether there was pleasure or not. There's no feeling. The feelings are absent while asleep, right? You're not aware. So that's why you have to perform ghusl regardless. So if the person who was asleep, he wakes up or she wakes up, right? When they wake up, right? And they find traces of semen, right? Then it becomes wajib to perform ghusl. If somebody thought that they had a wet dream, but when they woke up, right, they don't find any water, they don't find any traces of it, right? Do they have to make ghusl? No. When you find traces of semen, then this is when it becomes mandatory to perform ghusl. And this is based on his saying, alayhi salatu wassalam, when he was asked about the woman. And this is in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. He was asked about the woman. Is it obligatory for the woman to take a bath, yani ghusl, after she gets nocturnal discharge? He said, yes, if she notices water, meaning discharge. So if she sees that, same for the man, if you wake up and you see some traces, then you must perform ghusl. That's the first one. He said there are 5. Second one is when the husband and wife approach each other with penetration, whether there is ejaculation or not. Regardless, then it becomes mandatory on both the husband and the wife to make a ghusl. And this is based on his saying, alayhi salatu wassalam, and this is in the Sahih, إِذَا جَلَسَ بَيْنَ شُعَبِهَا الْأَرْبَعِ وَمَسَّ الْخِتَانُ الْخِتَانَ فَقَدْ وَجَبَ الْغُسْلِ. يعني when anyone sits amidst the 4 parts and the circumcised parts touch each other, then a bath becomes obligatory. And this is, like I said, for both parties, for the man and for the woman, for the husband and the wife. And there is a scholarly consensus on this, that it becomes mandatory. Whether there is a discharge or not, it doesn't matter. Then it becomes mandatory to make a ghusl. The third case, this is in the opinion of some of the scholars, that if somebody becomes a Muslim, then they must take a ghusl. Now, the reason I said according to some scholars, because some scholars actually do not agree with that. And they say this is only mustahab, not mandatory. The reason being, because the Prophet ﷺ, right, in some cases, he ordered those who converted to Islam to take a shower, to take a ghusl. For example, when he ordered Qais ibn Asim, when he converted to Islam, he ordered him to make a ghusl. Right? And this is in Sunan Abi Dawood and in Nasa'i and At-Tirmidhi, and Imam Al-Albani judged it as sahih. But in some other cases, he did not order them to make a ghusl. So he didn't order every person who converted to Islam to make a ghusl. That's why we say we transitioned the hukum from wajib down to mustahab. Because if it were wajib, then Rasulullah would have ordered every person who converted to Islam to take a ghusl. But when he did not, only in some cases, that clears that the hukum is not wajib, is only mustahab. But for some scholars, they say it is a wajib. Now, when we say converting to Islam, that includes also the person who committed apostasy and then he's now converting back to Islam. That is the same thing, right? Accepting Islam, whether the first time or after apostasy. So we said that Rasulullah ﷺ did not order every person to make ghusl, so that's why we say it is mustahab. Because by reconciling among all the evidences, it tells us that it is not wajib. Otherwise, he would have ordered everybody. The fourth one is death. When a person dies, then it is a wajib to make a ghusl for him or her, except for the martyr who falls in the battlefield. Then there's no ghusl for that person. But other than a martyr who falls in the battlefield, he or she must be washed. Ghusl. The proof on that is what Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and this is in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, what he ordered when his daughter Zainab radiyallahu anha wa ardaha, when she passed away during his life, and this is by the way a hadith that we saw before. I'll remind you how. When his daughter passed away, he ordered some woman to wash her 3 times or 5 times, and he said even more or more if you see that, right? With water mixed with sidr, which is some type of plant that they use. Remember when we were talking about the purifying water, and we discussed whether if water gets mixed with pure substances, and we gave the example of a sidr, right? As a matter of fact, we use this hadith to prove that even if you mix the water with some pure substances, but it doesn't overwhelm the water, and it stays, you can still call it water, that it is purifying water. This example, this is the hadith, exactly the same hadith that we saw before. We're reusing it. And he said with water and sidr, and in the last wash, then add to it kafur. Kafur, you know the kafur that gives a very nice scent? Mix with some kafur and wash her. He said wash her, as an order. That means that it is mandatory. The 5th case is, actually it is 2 cases but mixed together. This is for the women, for our sisters up there and our sisters listening online. In the case of the menses, the period, hayd, or in the postpartum bleeding, which is the bleeding that happens after delivery of the baby. You know that the mothers, after delivering the baby, they keep bleeding for a certain period of time. That bleeding is called postpartum bleeding, nafas, and it is a long period of time, right? When the menses or the postpartum bleeding ends, then they must perform ghusl. And this is based on hadith Aisha radiyallahu anha أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لفاطمة بنت أبي حبيش إذا أقبلت الحيضة فدع الصلاة وإذا أدبرت فاغتسلي وصلي. This is in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. He said to Fatima bint Abi Hubaysh, he told her, give up the prayers when the menses, refrain from praying when the menses begins, and if it has finished, then take a ghusl and start praying again. And also this is based on قوله تعالى in Surah Al-Nisa, Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah Azza wa Jal says, فَإِذَا تَطَهَّرْنَا. In the beginning of the ayah, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْمَحِيضِ قُلْ هُوَ أَذًى فَاعْتَزِلُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي الْمَحِيضِ وَلَا تَقْرَبُوهُنَّ حَتَّى يَطْهُرْنَ فَإِذَا تَطَهَّرْنَ فَأْتُوهُنَّ مِنْ حَيْثُ أَمَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ التَّوَّابِينَ وَيُحِبُّ الْمُتَطَهِّرِينَ. And when they have purified themselves, by making al-ghusl, tatahhur, by washing after the period of the menses ends, meaning from al-hayd. The postpartum bleeding is compared to the menses. We use analogy, qiyas, right? Postpartum bleeding is like the menses, right? During which the woman should not pray, and when it ends, she must perform ghusl to establish tahara. And this is also by consensus and by al-qiyas. Do we still have more time? I think we should stop here. Any questions about al-ghusl? No question? Inshallah, next time, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, if we are still alive, we're going to talk about how to perform ghusl. Now we've established it is wajib, what it is, and it is wajib, and what obligates al-ghusl. But how do I perform ghusl though? Right? There are 2 ways, just to give you a heads up real quick. There are 2 forms of it. There is the minimum that suffices, al-mujzi', and there is the complete form of making al-ghusl. Like we talked about al-wudu. Remember, there is the minimum wudu, which is sufficient, and there is the recommended wudu with all the sunan. Likewise in here, there is the minimum that establishes al-ghusl, that suffices, and there is the complete ghusl with all the sunan and everything. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about what is al-ghusl al-mustahab, the types of al-ghusl al-mustahab, Friday, al-Eid, etc., etc. Inshallah. With that said, اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.